Just to honor everybody's time today, we'll begin today's session. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for this July webinar, part of the Ontario Public Works Connects series. This webinar has been organized by the Ontario Public Works Association Education Committee. Today's webinar, On-Site and Excess Soil Management, Ontario Regulation 406-19, will be presented by MTE Consultants. My name is Enrico Stradiotto, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I'm a member of the Education Committee and also the 2021 President of the Ontario Public Works Association. There are many sponsors of OPWA who help to make events like this possible. We'd like to take a moment to say thank you for their generous support and their appreciation for the organization. To each of these organizations, thank you. Again, a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us. OPWA is a not-for-profit organization of professional public works practitioners. We are the Ontario chapter of the Canadian Public Works Association, CPWA, and one of 63 chapters overall in the American Public Works Association, APWA. We have over 600 public works practitioner members who are employed by provincial governments, municipalities, consulting engineers, utility companies, contractors, and suppliers. The chapter is also set up geographically with two branches. In the Niagara region, OPWA has the West Central branch, and in the Ottawa region, there is the Ottawa Valley branch. If you're not a member of OPWA, a special welcome to you. I hope you will give some consideration, for joining OPWA. OPWA's mission statement, connecting the public works community. And that's exactly what OPWA offers its members. Opportunities to connect through workshops, conferences, and social events. The Ontario Public Works Connects is a new program to assist OPWA's membership to connect with educational resources as well as with other members who are experts or trained in certain sectors of public works. These monthly webinars is one example of providing those resources to membership. To learn more about the chapter and its upcoming webinars, events, and resources available to our members, please visit our website at opwa.cpwa.net. Another great way to connect with Ontario Public Works Association is to join an OPWA committee. There's a lot going on with the committee work, and they can always use new ideas and volunteers to help. So for today's session, just some quick notes. Participants, all microphones and videos have been muted and cameras will remain off. Questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the webinar. Your question can be placed by you in the Q&A box during the webinar. And this is actually the best part of the webinar, I think, where we can answer your specific questions on the topic. Just look for the Q&A icon located at the bottom edge of your screen. Click and enter as many questions as you may like. So with today, our speaker is Carol Mitchell of MTE Consultants. Carol is a senior environmental engineer and technical director of MTE, involved in the fields of safety and environmental engineering in Ontario and Quebec since 1985. She is the technical lead for MTE with respect to new regulations like OREG 406-19 and specializes in other areas with environmental site assessments and records of site condition as examples. Carol has been closely monitoring the ministry's deliberations over the past few years and has been helping clients move and place soil diligently. We're hoping Carol can provide some guidance and clarification on what seems to be, at least for the uninformed, a complicated file. So with that, welcome Carol, and I'll have you take it away.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Very happy to be presenting to the Ontario Public Works Association today. I will preface my presentation today by saying 406 is still in its infancy. We're still learning a lot, but I'm going to do my best. Thank you very much for tuning in today. So as we all know, there's a lot of soil movement in Ontario, and this law is important because we need some regulation on trying to stop illegal dumping and also to minimize truck traffic. So those are the two main concepts for bringing in Ontario Regulation 40619 last December. So why is management important? I'll explain some key definitions, some new general rules, some very specific circumstances, some implications, and there will be some final thoughts. And then we'll have a question and answer, as Enrico mentioned. So again, it is quite complex. We've tried to simplify it. But I'm happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you. So lots and lots of trucks on the road in Ontario, as we all know. According to data that the MECP has, there's approximately 2.5 million trucks carrying soil on Ontario roads every year. That's a lot. And it's estimated 14% of construction costs are due to soil handling. Unfortunately, the industry is still working in a 1960s style of handling soil. There's still, unfortunately, midnight dumping going on. Soil's being moved without being tested. A lot of last minute, a lot of panic about who's got what and where can it go. So this law is trying to bring some clarity to that, and it will be more public information as the registry opens up next January. So what the law is trying to promote is reuse of soil appropriately. So we have to keep remembering that word appropriate, but the ministry wants us to reuse soil appropriately, and there has to be a beneficial use for it. You can't just raise the grade of something for no reason. And we also need to consider soil to be a resource and not a waste anymore. So why is management important? That reduces carbon footprint when it's relocated locally, protects landfill capacity. As you'll see, we won't be able to use normal landfills by 2025, after 2025. And to hopefully prevent some of the illegal dumping that's going on within an hour's distance of the GTA and other parts of the province. So what does it mean? What does 406 mean? It means a lot of increased project lead time. We have to really, really think about the excess soil at the outset of a project, and significant increased project expenses, administrative costs, operating and compliance. And I'll get into both of these topics as we progress into the presentation. So MTE has been participating, well, personally, I've been participating in all sorts of excess soil stakeholder meetings, feedback sessions. We're MTE is vendors of record to the MOE. Sorry, I keep calling them the MOE, the MECP. And since December 2019, we've gone to a lot of symposiums. I've been giving a lot of presentations. We work with our labs, and I'm also a member of the Ontario Environmental Associates group called ONIA, and I'm on the excess soil subcommittee, along with my colleague Jen Lamke, who is really on the forefront of this new law as well. So where is excess soil generated? Most of us know, but it's in the intensification of urban areas, region of Waterloo, particularly, and the GTA. And MTE ourselves have a lot of projects that generate excess soil, like subdivisions, site redevelopments, stormwater management ponds, road reconstructions, day-to-day operations of our clients. A lot of the work I do is brownfields and contaminated sites, so there's soil there that needs a new home, and eventually it will have to be reused rather than put into a landfill. So one man's dirty soil is another man's useful soil. So what is excess soil? There's a definition in the regulation, and it is that excess soil is soil, crushed rock, or soil mixed with crushed rock that has been excavated as part of a project and removed from the project area. So project area is a new term. So here's some of the new definitions that were brought about by the regulation. So there's the project or the work area, the project leader. So that's the person or entity taking responsibility for the project. They're the people that can be fined for illegal movement of excess soil. Then there's the project area or the site, and the project area can be larger than just one legal property. There's new excess soil quality standards. So there's a whole new set of tables that we have to compare our chemical results to. There's also something called the BRAT, the Beneficial Reuse Assessment Tool, which we can use, qualified people can use to generate soil standards specific to a project area or project. Then there's a whole new companion document called the soil rules. So there's the law, and then there's the soil rules that accompany it. The new standards are in the soil rules. I think the reason they do that is so they can change the soil rules more easily than they can change the law. So the intent of the law is to encourage reuse of soil. And I'm going to add to that the appropriate reuse of soil. And on January 1st, parts of the regulation became law. And on this January 1st, 2022, it'll all be in force. So here's some very important dates. So the law came in last December, not last December, December before that, and during COVID, and some new components became started this past January, as we know. Some projects, very large projects that already have started their soil testing, perhaps they're geotechnical, can be grandfathered. So we're encouraging a lot of our large clients to, we have been encouraging a lot of our large clients to start some soil testing work before January 1st, 2022. This is a big day for me, the January 20, so coming up, 2022, the registry opens and planning documents and requirements must be prepared and followed. So what is the registry? We haven't really seen it yet. There is a group working on it. They've been contracted to do so. They will manage it. It's a third party. And we've seen little tiny snippets of it, but we really don't know the contents of it yet. But it will be available for public viewing. So when we start registering trucks, general public should be able to go on the registry and figure out why that truck full of soil is, or that 100th truck full of soil going down the road near their home or their farm is doing so. So the grandfathering allows them to not have to register until January 2026. So until then, we have to use the best practice. We have to still test soil and make sure it's being appropriately reused. And we have been doing that for several years. And of course, the big date for many of you is by January 2025, landfills are closed to taking soil that can be reused. So what happened this past January? Excess soil can be reused as long as it's dry and it's not considered a waste. That's a big change. And it's directly transported to the reuse site, and written consent has been received by the reuse site, so by the receiver. The soil has to have there has to be a beneficial use for the soil. You can't just dump on a farmer's field and hope and say you're raising the grade. It has to be an actual appropriate and beneficial reuse. And soil must be placed in accordance with these new soil rules. So we're already comparing some of our data to the new excess soil standards that came into place when the soil rules were published. So some reuse sites have approvals, municipal or provincial approvals already, like a record of site condition site or some other special sites. And those, the rules for those, the limits for those sites don't change. It's their certificate of approval or their legal instrument that they already have still has to be followed. So what we have for these new excess soil quality standards, there's a set for small volumes, so less than 35 trucks, or for larger volumes greater than 350 meters cubed. And there's some new leachate tables that we have to follow. And there's also some ceiling values. So these tables are quite in depth, and you have to understand your site to know which standards to apply to your sites. So there are, as I mentioned before, there are also site-specific standards that can be developed using something called a BRAT. And it's like a mini risk assessment. So the BRAT gives you a lot of flexibility. They say it's the best option to achieve the goals of the regulation, but you need to understand the receiving sites development plans. And the reuse sites still should have fill management plans. So they know for these large receiving sites, what soil type goes where. Also, we've got some better flexibility with salt impacted soils coming out of this law. And dewatered and solidified soils, so stormwater management pond soils, also have some special considerations. So that's a whole other topic that I won't get into today. But if you have questions, please ask them at the end, or I'll try to answer them at the end. So hauling. So hauling of any excess soil is exempt from approvals, but the hauler, the truck driver, needs to know where he's going, and he needs to know what he's doing. He can't just be running around aimlessly with soil. Another key, very key new definitions, I guess I can say, are as of January 1st, there are now 8 types of sites that can reuse soil. Some of them need approvals, some of them don't. So I mentioned before, starting with the first box there, project area. You can define a project area and move from one site to another within that project area. The reuse site is what we typically think of moving from a site, let's say in Guelph, going to Brampton. So that's a reuse site there. Class 1 soil management sites are big soil handling sites with very significant ECAs. They're very hard to get approved. One of the big players in Class 1 soil management sites, of course, is GFL in the province of Ontario. GFL, I believe, has 8 Class 1 sites. Class 2 sites are very important for public works folks such as yourselves, because a Class 2 soil management site is generally managed by the municipality and can receive temporarily soil for low risk management and of dry soil. They can only take dry soil, and they can be that soil is then temporarily soiled at the Class 2 site and reused by the municipality at, say, another infrastructure project. So it's coming out of a tunnel project and stored there temporarily, and then maybe being reused for road reconstruction or a bridge construction, let's say. So those are 2 large classes, I guess, or types of soil reuse sites. Another one that's smaller, but very important for municipalities are the local waste transfer facilities, which have a lot more flexibility. They can also handle, or if they can do it appropriately, they can handle liquid soil, so soil out of hydrovacs, which is a whole other topic, which we can get into later. Again, landfills, normal landfills, but again, those will be closing by 2025. And then two new classes that came out just recently are residential depots. So a land developer can also create a temporary area where he can store, or they can store, residential soil to be reused as they're building homes. And then, of course, there's the retail landscaping depots, pretty self-explanatory. Landscape people can temporarily store soil to move between their projects. So as of January 1st, so right now in effect is soil storage for on-site sites and reuse sites and class 2 sites and local waste transfer sites. So the sites I think that most of you might be using to not have to pay a lot of money to a class 1 site or a landfill. So as of January 1st, those sites need to make sure they're mitigating any adverse effects. And this is a tricky one here. Individual stockpiles must not exceed 2,500 cubic meters, which isn't very big. And there's maximum stockpile size and layout stipulations. So it can't be too close to the property boundary, can't be near any waterways. There's a few caveats to where you can stockpile that maximum 2,500. There's a lot of soil testing and sorting requirements, and there's time limitations on how long that soil can sit at any one of those sites. So here we get to next year, January 1st, 2022, the big day. The registry, everything goes public. QPs need to sign off on things. So I'm a qualified person under Ontario Regulation 15304. So there can be qualified professionals are people who are engineers or geoscientists. So as of January, we have to start thinking about what needs to go on the registry if I do need to register my project. So there's a lot of planning that has to go into determining whether my project needs to be publicly registered. I believe there'll be a cost to registering too. So if no, you still have to follow the due diligence approach. You still have to think about, okay, is it appropriate what I'm doing? What's the quality of my soil? I'm going to take it to this other site. Do they know I'm bringing it to them? Have they agreed? What quality of soil do they need? But otherwise, if you have to register, it's very formal. Again, we haven't seen the registry yet, so I don't really know what kind of information they're expecting to be uploaded to the registry. It's going to be quite hairy. Apparently, there's a beta testing of the registry coming in this fall. So planning documents, what are they? They're kind of like mini phase 1s and 2s. There's an assessment of past uses, which is a mini, or quite an extensive in some cases, phase 1 environmental site assessment to figure out what's happened at the property where the soil is coming out of and needs a new home. And then there's the very prescribed sampling and analysis plan, which is quite a good thing for me as a qualified person, because now it's not me determining how many samples and what to analyze for necessarily. It's prescribed. So it's going to get expensive. Labs are going to be very busy because the amount of sampling that's prescribed by the law is extensive. It's by volume, and I'll get to that in a minute. Then there's the characterization report. So we report in that report why we sampled what we did, the volume of sampling we did, and the results. And then another planning document that's to be created is a destination report. So you take the results from the characterization report and you say, okay, this soil is appropriate for this destination, that destination, or another destination. Or maybe you already know the specific destination. And another planning document or something we need to plan for, again, is placing a notice of your project on this public registry. Another big key component of the new law coming into force in January is tracking of trucks. So all trucks, except for some very special circumstances, will need to be tracked. So it'll be also, I think, showing up on the registry. But again, I'm not sure how that's going to work. So the required sampling frequencies are changing, and they're being prescribed. So you can see here from this little chart, the minimum is 3 samples for in situ soil sampling of less than 600 meters cubed, which is 60 truckloads. And then if you have a stockpile, it's even more frequent, the sampling. If you have an area of potential environmental concern, the minimum you have to analyze those soil samples for is pH, VTEX, petroleum hydrocarbons, metals. And potentially, if some of those parameters exceed table 1, which is a very low table, it's background, you may have to also run some special leachate tests called an MSPLP. So to paraphrase that again, we have to analyze for VTEX, PHCs, and metals at a minimum. And then if you do have an area of potential environmental concern, let's say it's the soil is coming from an area that had a foundry on it, or a stormwater management pond, which is a separate thing, but or some industrial practice on it, you would have to also analyze for other potential parameters of concern. And again, stormwater management ponds themselves, if they're being cleaned out, have some very separate requirements. And if it's an RC property, so record of site condition property, there's other sampling frequencies that must be followed. And there's also limits on pH as well. So it gets more prescribed. Sampling and analysis is way more prescribed in the new law than it has been. So up to now, it's been up to the discretion of who's ever doing the soil testing to say, well, I think we should do 3 samples and I think we should test for metals. No, you have to do a lot more than that now. And I'll give you an example of the increased cost to that in a minute. So here's where we get into what's very important for public works folks is exemptions, because from my understanding of the law, there are there's a lot more flexibility and a few more exemptions for these small infrastructure projects, municipal projects, and they're very complex. So, and each case is unique. So you're going to have to really work with your QPs to determine whether your project is exempt or not. But here's a few examples from filing a notice and doing all those planning requirements. So no registry and no, mini phase 1s and 2s or anything like that. So some soils are considered reusable if they're already within your project area. And topsoil is exempt, so is peat. Consolidated or unconsolidated aggregate from the operation of a pit is exempt. They have to follow their own rules under their own. They don't have ECAs, but they have pit licenses produced by the MNR. Some small quantities, emergencies are exempt, and some infrastructure projects are exempt. And again, there's a lot of flexibility for municipalities, but it's very complicated. And I always go back to the fact that If you're taking your soil to someone else, so a different owner of the property, of the receiving site, they're going to want to know what they're receiving. So the onus is still on you to test the soil for them, or to have the soil tested. So exemptions, more exemptions from the documentation. You still may need to file a notice on the registry, and you still would need to implement a tracking system for the trucks. But a project leader is not required to undertake the planning requirements if the project is in an agricultural area or it's parkland and will not go to agricultural. But of course, all of this doesn't apply if part of the project area is known to be contaminated, like there was an old gas tank or something. So large reuse sites, I'm not sure how often you guys get involved in these, but so they're receiving at least 1,000 truckloads. They will, of course, be required to register. They have to have a fill management plan. They must, it has to be a cumulative total, not just the 1,000 trucks that are coming next month. They have to develop and implement procedures to track and inspect every load. It's a big deal. So large receivers, some of our large development clients will have to do this. Some of them are already doing it, except of course the registry, because there is no registry yet. But there's a lot of planning and putting the appropriate people in place to manage these things. So infrastructure, what does this law, I mentioned earlier, there's some exemptions for infrastructure. What do they consider infrastructure? Important, I think, for Ontario Public Works people. Public highways, transit lines, railways, pipelines, sewage collection, stormwater, electricity, telecommunications, bridges, rights of way. So infrastructure projects are commercial industrial sites, basically. They're not going to build a house on a bridge or an interchange or a stormwater management pond. So there's flexibility in the new law so that you can move soil from one infrastructure project to another. But if the timeline is limited, you can't move the soil today for a bridge that's going to be built 5 years from now. But there is some flexibility. The soil can go to the local waste transfer facility if it's managed by a public body, or the infrastructure project. And it can be used for certain low-risk storage and processing activities without an approval. So there's some flexibility for infrastructure projects, but each infrastructure project could be unique depending on the distance to the local waste transfer facility, or what the soil type is and what the volume is. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into it, but there is quite a bit of flexibility for infrastructure projects. So as of January, this coming January, the exemptions from the registry and filing a notice and all those planning requirements could be, if you need to repair a water main break, or you're going to reuse the soil at another infrastructure project within that time frame, and then movements between the infrastructure projects. So in my mind, municipalities have been given the most flexibility in terms of appropriately reusing the soil they generate on other projects. Another big new concept, I guess, is stormwater management ponds sediments. We all know we have to clean those out. Some of them are all coming due. It's been a big topic of concern in these past 5 years. And there are rules in the soil rules specifically for stormwater management pond sediment. Of course, you don't need to do an assessment of past uses because we already know it's a stormwater management pond, but it does have the sediment does need to be sampled. There does need to be reporting, and there does need to be tracking. And of course, there are rules for sampling it dry or solidified, if I can put it that way. versus the wet. So it's quite an extensive explanation in the soil rules regarding stormwater management pond sediment testing. Testing must also include pHs, cyanide, and ECSAR on top of hydrocarbons and metals. Very prescribed. It's very, very prescribed. So a recap on what we've learned so far. We're going to need a lot of increased project time in the beginning to make sure we understand our project and we understand what is required of the project in terms of planning and the planning documents that are required, because that APU and the sampling analysis plan and the soil characterization report, I mean, those can take weeks. So it's not last minute, hey, I've got some soil, I'm going to take it here. Unless you're exempt because it's a small project or it's an emergency or it's an infrastructure project going to potentially another infrastructure project. So for many of our clients at MTE, we'll need increased project lead time and this registering. So we have to really think about at the onset of a project and its design, the location, the size, and the depth of the area to be excavated, the volume of excess soil to be generated, the soil sampling and analysis in conjunction with other typical design investigations. So maybe we start thinking about that during the geotechnical assessment, because maybe they were digging a big hole for a big new hospital and the geotech's happening, well, we can tag along and sample some soil at that point. But there's definitely increased project expenses, and we definitely have to start thinking about how to reuse the soil and the timing aspect of it. Now, I do know that some very entrepreneurial folks are starting to create what are called soil banks, where they'll take your soil away from you, and then they'll find an appropriate reuse for it. So there is, that's like a class 1 or class 2, I believe, for soil banks. So here's an example of a road reconstruction. So 500 meters of what this new law means for the road reconstruction in 2022. So right now, let's say we're reconstructing 0.5 kilometer of road, and our cut fill balance tells us we're going to generate about 5,000 cubic meters of excess soil from the project area. That can't stay there because it's a road. It's got to go somewhere else. So 500 truckloads need a new home. Right now, MTE spends probably about $5,000 helping the municipality or the contractor figure out what that soil looks like, and we spend about $5,000 on that. But going forward, if you need to register and carry out the planning documents, and you really need to think about it in advance, the cost will be closer to $30,000. So that's a big, big increase. So 4 to 6 weeks before now takes probably about maybe two months, a little bit longer maybe, but it does mean we have to start thinking about all this 6 months in advance of construction. So and most municipalities know what they're doing in the future for road reconstruction, but they have to really start thinking about getting some of these reports done in advance. So an area grading project, for example, you need to remove 5,000 of surplus soil, same thing, takes weeks, but we still need months to be prepared to do it. And again, it's 5 to 6 times the cost. So key takeaways and some of my final thoughts. So the mandatory requirements started in January already, and there's a lot more to come in this January, specifically the registry when things become public. That changes my world, because right now my work is with my clients and the public doesn't necessarily see any of it. Environmental considerations will be unique for each and every project. What we really need to stop and think about is I've got some soil I need to get rid of. Will it be impacted? Could it be impacted? Was there a gas tank nearby? Was it in an industrial site? Is it in a road? You know, what's nearby? What could be there? Is it a farmer's field? So then you have to start considering what would be the appropriate reuse for some of that soil? How do I easily move it to a close by site where it can be appropriately reused? So very, very important to start thinking about any excess soil as not a waste anymore, but as something that can be reused by someone appropriately. And a big one for some of our clients is this grandfathering clause. You know, if you have big projects that are going to generate a lot of excess soil, like City of Hamilton for their new wastewater treatment plant, you know, you start testing the soil way in advance so you can at least be exempt before January 1st, 2022. And what the ministry really wants us to do is mitigate the risk of reusing soil by planning and understanding the intended use sites. So that it's quite complex. There's a lot of, it's very difficult to read the law, but I've tried to give you a very brief summary of the main points. But if you'd like to get into some of the nitty gritty, perhaps I can answer those questions, perhaps not, but I'll give it a try. So my big takeaway for this is get ready. It's going to be very hairy in January 2022 if the registry's up and running. So, you know, talk to your QPs, figure out what if they're ready. Start testing soil now, looking at budgets, looking at volumes, and start getting ready. So I'll take questions now if anybody has any. I think Enrico was going to help me with that.
Yeah, certainly will, Carol. That was an excellent presentation. I think you know, that cartoon there kind of paints a picture, right? There's a bit of a learning curve here still to continue, and for sure there's bound to be bumps along the way as we continue to learn more in terms of how this regulation is going to govern us. So we do have many questions, Carol, and good for us. We have a good 15 minutes to address those. And if we have your permission, if people like to stay on, we'll just continue on with the question period if that works. But I'll just invite our attendees to continue on adding their questions to the Q&A window, and we hope to answer them all. At the same time, you do see Carol's contact information on the screen. So if you need a screenshot to and do a follow-up with Carol, you can certainly do that. So let's begin with the questions. Now, Carol, some of these came in early, and okay. I believe you addressed some of the question through the latter bit of the presentation, but okay. I think it might serve just good purpose to be repeating even the question and repeating the answer, you know, just sure. Because there is a lot of information here. But this one might be a bit of a challenge to kick things off, and it's from Ron Ray. And he says, can you please comment on how shell is intended to be handled with the context of the new reg? As a bedrock, it has not been handled as an excess soil in the past. Does it need to be sampled as a soil? And does the naturally occurring chemical content such as WSB, which I expect you're familiar with.
A water-soluble boron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that in your presentation. And barium, as an example, need to be viewed as a soil contaminant under the OREG?
Ron, I'm not sure if you work for the City of Hamilton, but that's the $1 million question. Shale is a very, very specific thing, and I am not an expert in shale. But there are definitions of what is rock and what is soil in 406. Very specific. It has to do with Civ number 10. And what does the stuff look like when it comes out of the ground? I know in the ground, in situ, it looks like rock, but when it comes out of the ground, it looks more like soil. So it's very, very specific question. And I would say your best option to have that question answered is to go directly to the MECP. One of my colleagues at MTE is working on a very large shale project now. And I can, if you want to contact me on email, I can direct you to their contact at the MECP.
Great. Thanks, Carol.
That's a tough one. That's a good on you for asking me the toughest question first.
Yeah, it kind of lies in the gray area, no pun intended, with the color of the shale too, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of, and Ron also mentioned the naturally occurring substances. There's also language in the new law about naturally occurring and background. So that's one that will have to be responded to by the MECP themselves.
All right. And you're referring to the contamination there, right? Where you have naturally occurring contamination.
Right.
Yeah.
Hot water soluble boron and barium can be naturally occurring in shale.
Okay, here's a question from Caroline. If we're moving soils at our construction site during construction and reusing the same soil on the same site, how does the new regulation apply to this scenario?
Caroline, thank you. That's an easy question to answer. You're within a project area, you're exempt. You have to do it appropriately. You can't move dirty soil from one part. You don't want to move dirty soil from one part of your site to another, but that becomes a project area and you can move your soil appropriately. So no registering.
All right.
You're within its own little home there.
All right. I have a couple questions I'm going to combine that are related to BRAT. So one person just wanted, if you could define again the acronym for BRAT.
Yeah, beneficial reuse something tool. It's like a mini risk assessment for the receiving site. So it can have its own limits for the soil it can receive. Because right now the tables in the new law are for generic sites. It's similar to 15304 where you look to see if there's potable drinking water or not. But then the BRAT is more like a risk assessment that can really get down to the nitty gritty of a specific site and give it its own receiving criteria. So it can be really useful for sites, complicated sites that have many areas. Maybe it's a city block and they need 4 years worth of fill. Well, over here by the bridge, they can put this, and over here by the school lot, they can put this, and over there by the houses, they can put this type of soil. So the BRAT can generate those numbers for them.
Okay, so here are 2 additional questions related to BRAT. So I'll break it down into 2 and you can address the first question. If BRAT is used, how is that information or status documented with respect to potential future redevelopment of the receiving site?
Well, the BRAT would be generated by a qualified person for the receiving site. And that's the soil at that point in time that they agreed to accept. But for the future, you want to think about, well, okay, I'm accepting, my site's industrial today, but in the future, I want to make it residential. So you might want to think about whether the BRAT was appropriate or not. Maybe you just say, no, I'm only taking soil that meets residential for now. I know I'm an industrial site, but I want it to be residential. I mean, that's far-fetched. I don't think that would happen very often, but you never know. It's up to the receiver to determine what soil type they can take.
All right, and this one has maybe a little more policy within it, but does the use of the BRAT require the obtainment or imposition of a certificate of property use or some other instrument on title? If you're familiar with that.
Could you just repeat that one?
Yeah. Does the use of the BRAT require the obtainment or imposition of a certificate of property use or some other instrument on title?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It will go on the registry. I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay, we can capture that, and we can have that addressed for Matthew later on.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
You can read about the BRAT in the soil rules, or there's a whole other companion document just for the BRAT.
Alone, right?
It's
okay.
very, very specific. Like the BRAT it's very, very specific for large sites, like the one I was mentioning, maybe 4 years of infilling, and they have, like, they want to create a patchwork quilt of what different types of soil they can take. And that site, that the one I'm referring to, that we have MTE has, and I'm the QP for, does not, it has records of site condition. So those actually trump the BRAT.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Yeah, obviously underlining with some difficulty or complex questioning there. So we'll certainly get back.
Yeah, we have a smart crowd here. It's good.
All right, here's a question from Mara, and she's asking, can you clarify the definition of topsoil? And for example, would material from cleaning out ditches be considered topsoil?
Very good question. I am also not a topsoil expert. I think you'd have to talk to an agronomist to determine, one man's topsoil may not be another man's topsoil. But generally on our projects, we consider it to be the very organic top layer, and it needs a specific home, but it is exempt.
Okay. So here's a question, Carol, that I believe you addressed, but maybe just kind of repeating the information. Is there a specific volume where the project, okay, yeah, I'll just read it as is. Is there a specific volume where if the project is excavating below, the new OREG won't apply?
Yes, I think earlier in the presentation, let me just get that exemption for small projects, small quantities. But I don't know if you can still see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Small quantities. Maybe this could be a question and answer for my right-hand man, Jen Lamke, who's awesome. Jen, I don't know if you want to just get into what we're calling small quantity. I know it differs.
Sure, I'll jump in. 2,000 cubic meters seems to be the main, the magic number, if it triggers registration or not. Some of the exemptions do include smaller numbers, like if you have 100 cubic meters or less, and it's going directly to a local waste transfer facility, that's exempt. But 2,000, if you want to use that number as a general rule.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay. And just to circle back to the topsoil question, topsoil, my understanding is topsoil does have a very specific definition. I want to say the Municipal Planning Act. I don't want to misspeak, but we can definitely give you a specific definition for topsoil.
It's some volume of or percentage of organic matter or something.
Okay, here's a second question. Would registry be required for each project or each site? And
yes.
Would the owner be required to register, or the contractor who is moving the soil?
The owner. Yes. So that, I'm just being very general here. There are a lot, I said each project is unique. So there's a lot of ways of getting out of registering, perhaps. But if you do need to register, it would be the project leader. And the project leader is usually the owner.
Okay. As we continue on, Carol, we're getting some great feedback with great information of this presentation. So everybody's enjoying it. Here's a question from Brad. Who would determine or approve disposal of an appropriate reuse?
So I work as a QP for both source sites and receiving sites. So the receiving site's QP would say, yes, I'm a residential subdivision. I want soil that meets table 2.1 residential. So if you go into those new tables I talked about, you'll see the different types of property uses: parkland, industrial commercial community, or residential institutional. And as the owner of the final resting place for the soil, I determine, or the QP working for that owner determines what soil quality they can receive, what maximum soil quality they can receive. So they can always receive table 1. Table 1, it can be used ubiquitously in the province of Ontario, but they may want to up that because finding table 1 soil can be difficult.
Okay.
Did I answer that properly, Enrico?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if there's a follow-up there, Carol.
Yeah.
So, here's a question that actually did trigger the same thought in my mind. This is coming from Ian, and he's asking, can you comment on the removal of granular material from existing sites previously developed, and the fact that that granular material, which was previously imported, would now be by definition an excess soil? Would it need to be treated as soil and tested accordingly?
Another excellent question, Ian. Thank you. Huge topic, huge topic. As a qualified person, so myself, this is my own opinion. If it looks like soil and can be tested like soil, it should be tested. So I understand that, even though aggregate coming out of an aggregate pit is exempt, once it's placed on a site and the site is used, let's say for a couple of years or 15 minutes, and then that aggregate's going to come back out of the ground and go somewhere else. As the QP for that receiving site, I'd want it tested. That's to me, if it looks like soil and can be tested like soil, it should be tested. Because a few years from now at the receiving site, no one's going to say, oh, don't worry about testing over there. That soil came from is aggregate. It came from a pit and is exempt. No, it looks like soil. I have to test it so it can be appropriately handled and reused somewhere else. Very, very hot topic, because of course the people who run gravel pits want to tell their clients that nothing needs to be tested. I'm not in that. I'm not of that opinion as a qualified person who's personal, takes personal liability in these things.
So we're at the 1 o'clock hour. Carol, if you're okay, we still have some remaining questions, but
Sure.
Yeah, you're good. Okay, and I just wanted to address a couple of questions of the audience. One is questions being asked, is there an opportunity to receive a copy of this webinar? So for the audience, we are putting the recordings of these webinars on the OPWA website, and that should be available in a couple days, and a link will be provided to the attendees for that webinar. And if anyone does ask Carol for a copy of the presentation, would you have a problem with that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Which is also by video on that recording
Right.
as well anyways. So, all right, so here's a question similar back to what we had with the ditch question.
Okay.
And this is from Dylan. Understanding there are some exemptions for the right-of-way projects, what does this regulation look like for a simple project such as a roadside ditching along a municipal road allowance that would remove approximately 50 cubic meters? Is this material exempt from all
Yes.
aspects of the regulation? Can the soil be moved without consequence to a municipally owned property or a private landowner requesting that material?
Okay, again, it's a small volume. So it is exempt. However, the receiver has the right to say, what are you bringing me? Right, so there's still some level of due diligence that goes on. still some level of due diligence. I
Right.
have to think about, is that reuse appropriate? Am I just dumping leafy muck on a farmer's field? Is that appropriate? The farmer has to agree that it's appropriate for him.
Okay.
I hope I've answered that, but that's a very specific question with it for a very small, the law is not written for small projects.
No.
It's
yeah.
written because there's a lot of trucks moving around with a lot of soil that could be better reused somewhere else.
Right. The logistical part of moving all this volume.
Right.
Of
So
excess
stuff
soil.
from a ditch, the first thing that would come to my mind is it wet? Can you legally transport it?
Yeah. Okay. Just a clarification in some direction I gave the audience, the link will be given to the attendees only. Obviously, we're not going to make this as for public access since there was a registration fee with this webinar. So only those in attendance today will be able to have access to that recording link. So I hate to kind of repeat the question, but just for the purposes of satisfying Robin's curiosity, this is a similar question, Carol.
Okay.
For municipalities that operate tree planting programs, i.e. planting trees in the parks or the right-of-way, could they define the project area as the city limits to allow the movement, temporary storage, and reuse to be done so under an exemption? Unless, of course, there's a reason that the soil is contaminated.
Right. So to that, Robin, I say, do you have a temporary storage area that you use? Like that would fall under maybe a local waste transfer facility? I mean, it has the word waste in it, but is there a spot where the city or the municipality brings in some great soil for their new trees? They don't want the trees to die, of course, they want them to thrive. And then they just temporarily take from there. I mean, that to me is an exemption. I don't imagine it's huge piles of soil. I don't know. I mean, there are limits on like I said before, 2,500 cubic meters. But that's very specific, but you just have to kind of think about, the soil is clean. So, I can handle it as a municipality. I own the soil. I'm putting it back into municipal lands. Am I doing that appropriately? And it's small quantities. I would imagine you're buying topsoil or it's very specific soil for that use. It's probably been tested to make sure the trees don't die.
Okay, I would say for sure. Yeah, go ahead, Carol. Were you going to
and you can
that?
always hire someone to test it too, if you're concerned about that. Does it need to be registered? Probably not. It's probably a small quantity and it's just sitting at on a municipal parking lot or a municipal space and being used from one municipal project to another.
All right. So you'll be spot on with this question and being a quality person yourself.
Yes.
So the question is, who is required by the regulation to engage a quality person for the project? Is it the owner, the receiving site, or the contractor who is handling the excess soil?
Good question. All three could hire QPs.
And would
As
all
an
three be
owner,
working together, like coordinating between them, Carol?
They could. Mm-hmm. Or the source site knows, oh, I'm going to have 1,000 truckloads come off my site in 2023. So I'm going to start getting testing done now with my QP. Oh, and then the project gets transferred somehow to a new project leader. Let's say the constructor. I don't know how contracts, that's a very specific contract question, legal question. So do you transfer ownership? Is the project leader now the contractor? Well, that would be in the contract. So let's say there's a contract. It says the project leader is now the constructor. Okay, so there you go. And then now we want to find a new home for this soil. Well, that new home, if they're taking 1,000 truckloads, should have a QP. And that QP might say, yeah, I totally agree with all the sampling that's gone on. It's totally appropriate for my site. Please bring it on. Or we might say, oh, I wish they'd done, they forgot to test for pesticides. You know, before you can bring it to my place, I want pesticide testing. It's just an example. But yeah, all three of those levels could have QPs, for sure the source site and for sure the receiving site, because the source site is on the hook because they're the ones generating the soil, and the receiving site is on the hook too, because that's where the soil lives in the end.
Great, okay. A question here from Ian. Can the project leader make the decision as to whether their project is exempt from notice filing and planning requirements in accordance with the regulation, or would it have to be established by a QP?
Good question. Can the project leader make the decision? I believe so. I don't know the qualifications that are required to register in the registry. I'm assuming whoever owns the soil needs to specify who can register on their behalf. So then if you're becoming the registerer, then you are making decisions about whether the planning requirements are required. That's a very specific question as well, Ian. Like, I don't know your project that you're thinking about, but the ministry wants to make sure they know who's responsible, because they want to be able to find that person, find them and find them.
Track them down.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously there's the liability associated with this new regulation.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
So I'm sorry if I didn't answer that to the nth degree, but it's we haven't seen the registry at all. So I'm assuming there's some initial questions, like, do you have authority? Those kinds of things. And some project leaders have their own QPs. It's just okay, where they want to transfer the liability to.
Right. All right, you good for a couple more, Carol?
Sure.
Yeah, all right. So this one, in our own discussions, we touched upon, which is with the hydrovacs.
Mm-hmm.
So the question coming from Jason, can you please explain if this new regulation covers dumping of hydrovac trucks? Currently,
yes,
a manifest is completed, but are there any changes coming for this?
Yes. So hydrovacs generate what's called not dry soil in the law. So it's not called liquid soil, it's called not dry soil. And yes, not dry soil needs to go to a site with an ECA or a local waste transfer facility if it's municipality municipal project. So it's their own hydrovac, they've got a local waste transfer facility, it's set up to take hydrovacs, it knows, you know, the water's got to be contained. It's very specific, or it needs to go to a site where, again, there's an ECA, the water is contained, it doesn't run off to the nearest stream, and or the soil's been solidified, or something's happened. So yes, and there's some new guidance, I've been told, there's some new guidance coming out from the ministry on not dry soil, on hydrovac soil. Very hot topic. I've been working a lot on this with a large firm in Ontario who move 150 hydrovacs a day, and we've come across some really interesting scenarios, because some of them dump at pits and quarries, which is a whole other situation. So yes, hydrovacs are covered under this new law.
Okay.
And there's new guidance coming out on that. The ministry has told us they're going to create some fact sheets that are supposed to be coming out. And one of the topics of the 8 or 7 fact sheets is hydrovacs. because more clarification is definitely needed.
All right, here's a question regarding Form 180, which I believe is paperwork of the contractor. So under Form 180, contractors apply for approval to dump excavated material on a private site. As a municipal project, would the municipality be responsible for material testing prior to construction under the regulation? Or would this be the requirement of the contractor to submit information with the Form 180 to the municipality?
I don't know each individual municipality's rules, but definitely yes, soil must be tested prior to construction. That's the one big thing that comes out of my presentation. Planning, planning, planning.
So then the answer, short answer being it's a municipality
Yes.
responsibility?
As a municipal project, they are the they own the soil that's coming from their project. It's up to the municipality to get tested. They may put it onto their contractor to hire a QP like me, but generally the municipality, they're getting ready to do a project. They're maybe doing some geotech, and because they want to do something with their piece of property that's going to have soil taken out of it, and the environmental gets involved at that stage to start characterizing the soil to figure out what the quality of the soil is, the chemical quality of the soil is that's going to come out of that project. We've been using Form 180s on a temporary basis for some of our projects because we find the 180-3 to be useful as an acceptance document for the receiving site. So the receiver says, yes, I know I'm receiving soil from this project and I understand its soil quality and it's appropriate for my site. Okay. So as a municipal project, would the municipality be responsible? Absolutely. They are the project leaders.
Short question here. If you may have any insight, Carol, in regards to the disposal of millings.
I'm not sure what millings are, but is that tunneling from tunneling? I'm not sure what millings are. Sorry, never heard that term.
Yeah, it could be that, or maybe processing of some material like rock.
Yeah, if it meets there's definitions of soil and rock in 406, and I encouraged David to read those.
Yeah.
If it's liquid soil, if it's not dry soil, then there's really some things you have to follow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have a question of my own, Carol,
sure.
And I'd be curious of your assessment overall, what the picture looks like with this new regulation coming into Ontario. Obviously, you set it up to say that there's going to be bumps along the way. So it's a lot about the regulation and understanding the requirements and getting people have to get set up for the new regulation. But I'm curious about even the processing that has to happen through this regulation. So the example would be soil testing. And what I get from your presentation is there's going to be a lot of soil testing requirements in place. So I'm curious, do we have, shall I call it the logistics, the process power and resources to, address this new regulation in order to, meet the requirements and get the approvals out the door?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, MT, we have set up an excess soil team. I'm the QP for it, and Jen, who spoke earlier, is the manager of that group. We have our geotechnical people trained in soil testing, but yes, it's creating a whole new subgroup of environmental consultants. And in terms of number of samples, the labs, in my understanding, the labs have doubled their capacity to get ready for this law. So my recommendation to people is to buy a lab. We're going to be making a lot more money going forward.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're trying. I mean, some people are ready and some people aren't. I mean, right. MTE has been following it all along since the beginning. I take it as my responsibility, and I've been attending a lot of meetings and learning a lot, trying to make sense of it. trying to really synthesize it down, but just really, really, what I want for everyone to understand is you have to think about it in advance. No more last minute, hey, you know, I've got some soil, it's got to come off tomorrow. Where can it go? That's 1961, which was a great year, but you can't do that anymore. You have to really plan and think about where it could go, because by 2025, the last resort is gone, the landfills. And the other big thing about this law is enforcing. We don't really know how it's going to be enforced. The municipalities are supposed to be enforcing it themselves. Right? There's not a new team of environmental officers from the MACP that are being created to start running around looking at the size of people's soil piles. It's complaint driven. So if Mrs. Smith looks out her window and sees the 100th truck going by, she may call the MECP and say, why is there 100 trucks going by my front door? And then the MECP officer will look on the registry and say, yep, that's part of this project, and they've registered, and look, I can see all their soil testing. I'm imagining that's how it's going to go, but we haven't seen the registry yet.
Right. Okay. I guess, you know, I've been exposed to a little bit of this in my sector of industry, and I guess my real simple take on it, if you can minimize excess soils, then more to the benefit. Absolutely.
We're saying to our large clients who develop cut fill balances, because now we're in the region of Waterloo, where I mostly do a lot of work. We're getting to the lumpy, bumpy parts of the province where it's not as easy to develop. So we're asking our civil engineers to really tighten their belts on their cut fill balance and not generate any excess soil.
Right. Okay.
If they can. I mean, topsoil usually has to come off.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it is 20 minutes past the hour. We have really put you to work today, Carol, and we appreciate the extra time that you took to address the questions. I think we were well over like 20 plus questions on this. So it certainly shows it's a topic of high interest, and you provide some excellent guidance and insight today. So I want to say thank you very much. If I could have you, Carol, maybe just go to your last slide where your contact information is, and for anybody that is still with us and have a chance. Oops. Oh, that's all right. Anybody that didn't have a chance can certainly follow up with Carol directly if you need to. So, and also thank you to Jen Lemke, who did join us to answer a couple questions. So thank you very much to MT Consultants. You're also a sponsor of OPWA, so we thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll send off for today, sign off for today, a great webinar from OPWA. And just a reminder, a link will be provided to any of the attendees for today if you just want to rehash this bit of complex regulation that's coming at us pretty quickly. So thank you again to everyone, and I hope you have a great day and remainder of the week. Bye for now.
Thank you, Enrico.